Good evening and welcome to our study tonight. Let's go right into in the news this week. Lots of things happening, and I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to give a prediction. But before I do that, well, let me get to the right ones. I think I'm in the wrong spot, so hold on one second. Let me try to get this out of here. Okay. I'm sorry, I had the wrong thing pulled up there. So first off, I want to do this. This is, will 2024 elections change the world? That's the article. It said the 2024 calendar year will see a record number of national and parliamentary elections with nearly half the world's population, 3.8 billion people, theoretically going to the polls to vote for their leaders. Indeed, from the United States to the UK and to European Union, from India to Mexico, from Taiwan to Indonesia, some of the world's most strategically important countries will hold elections this year. Many analysts fear that the results of this year's elections could shift the world away from democracy and more towards authoritarianism. Dictators will likely remain, and Europe could see a hard right-hand shift. Democracy is being challenged everywhere in our world, not just in places that rank poorly on surveys of democratic values. The book of Revelation describes the future of a dictator known as the beast, the Antichrist, who will eventually lead a configuration of 10 nations or leaders in Europe just prior to the return of Jesus. This coming beast will be backed by a powerful religious leader, the false prophet, an individual, the Apostle Paul says, quote, opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. The 2024 elections could be a prelude to significant changes in global politics that may help to set the stage for such dramatic events. The wise will be watching. Now, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to do it. What about the United States race for president in 2024? Everything's a buzz about that. If you look at any of the news, you're going to hear about it. So who will it be? Who will be the candidates? Okay, now I don't usually do this, but let me give you my opinion. Now, it's not prophecy. This is my opinion. What if it's not between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, as everybody thinks it will be? Or if it's between Donald Trump and someone else? What do I mean? You may ask, who? Well, I'm glad you asked. Consider what I'm about to say and weigh it accordingly. First off, I've noticed recently, in the last 2 weeks, that the liberal media, who have been Biden backers and Biden promoters and a propaganda wing of the Democratic Party, have recently been reporting on the misery of Joe Biden's candidacy. They've talked about his low approval ratings, things you've never heard them do before. They talk about Trump beating him in all of the polls. They'd never say that. Even telling their audiences of his crisis, now they're calling it, on the border. They talk about his loss of women voters, the black vote, and the young vote. Amazingly, they are now throwing him under the bus. So when I saw this, and I've been hearing this last couple of weeks, I've been asking, why would they do that? Since they were pro-democracy and Democratic Party and pro-Biden, well, I believe they have a very specific agenda, and I believe they have a reasoning. Here's what I think could happen, again, my opinion. As they pull him further down by their reporting, and they're pulling him down, they create a desperation among Democratic voters. I believe sometime immediately before the Democratic National Convention, which will be held from August 19th to the 22nd this year, I believe Joe Biden will pull his name from being a candidate. Now, I believe it'll wait till the last minute because no one wants Kamala Harris, including the Democrats, to fill in as the president. I further believe that Michelle Obama, you heard me say it right, who right now continues to say over and over again that she would not seek the presidency, I believe she'll be nominated by the Democratic candidate for president from the floor of the delegation. So why do I believe that? Well, there's several reasons. Number one, she's more political than you could possibly imagine. She's actually more political than her husband, although she comes off as not being that way. She grew up in Chicago in a political family. Her father, Fraser Robinson, was a Democratic precinct captain and very, very involved in the Democratic Party. Secondly, in high school, she was best friends with Jesse Jackson's daughter, Sunita, and around their house a lot when he was running for president. From her own words, it was an exciting time to see the movement of politics. Third, she went to Princeton University, and according to the people, grew politically. She was an anti-American, as noted in her famous statement in the 2008 campaign after Barack won the Wisconsin primary. She said, "For the first time in my life, my adult lifetime, I'm really proud of my country." Fourth, she fell in love with Barack Obama, she said, because she went to a meeting where he was giving a political speech, and it was one of the best political speeches she ever heard. 5, she campaigned for Hillary Clinton against Trump all across the country in 2016. 6, in her carefully scrubbed book, she left any mention of politics out of it. Very, very rare. Who does that? That's the First Lady. At the end of her book, she says, quote, I have no intention of running for office. The only political thing she said, which tells me that she does have an intention. So what else is the purpose of her book? She went on a book tour after writing it, 15,000 seat auditoriums. To tell what? For what purpose? Lastly, if nominated in August, she will instantly unite women to her cause, which the Democratic Party is losing. She will instantly garner the black vote, which they're losing. She will no doubt win independence. In short, she'll revive the Democratic Party. It's just a thought. By the way, she's also a much, much better speaker than her husband was. So there's a lot to look for. Now, I hope that doesn't happen, but basically I think that that would be the Democrats' move, the best move they can make, and we'll see if something like that goes on. Okay, let's talk a little bit more. Talking about politics a little bit, let's talk about Biden and Israel. The Biden doctrine will not fool Israelis. The person who is playing politics with the security of Israel and the fate of its citizens is President Joe Biden. It is Biden who is playing a double game in which he seems willing to ensure Hamas' survival in power in order to settle scores with Netanyahu. He does not like Netanyahu, as well as to defeat former President Donald Trump in November. That's the context for the discussions about the latest proposal for a ceasefire and the release of 136 hostages, some living and actually some presumed dead. So Biden is pushing Israel. His practice of talking out of both sides of his mouth on the conflict, backing Israel while also bashing and pressuring it to scale down its military campaign, has escalated to a point where a tipping point may soon be reached. American involvement in the hostage talks seem not so much to be focused on freeing the captives as they are on hamstringing the Israeli war effort and the wrong-footing Netanyahu. While Washington's focus on demands for the creation of a Palestinian state still remain, but it would be a mistake to waste too much time unpacking this doctrine, whose particulars are also being put forward by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and other Democrats. But suffice it to say that its Palestinian state proposal is dead on arrival, for the same reasons that the similar ideas have failed before. Neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis want one. The Palestinians have rejected numerous deals that would have given them an independent state because they would have required them to live in peace with Israel. That's the last thing they want to do. Anything that Biden does will not undo the damage he did in the first 3 years in office, during which he tried to resurrect former President Barack Obama's dangerous Iran nuclear deal, while distancing the United States from both the governments of Israel and of Saudi Arabia. This strengthened and emboldened Iran, reviving the threat of Iranian-backed terrorism from the Houthis and other forces that Biden can no longer ignore after the deaths of 3 U.S. servicemen in Jordan a couple weeks ago. Biden's sanctions, and he sanctioned 4 Israelis a week ago, a case of legal overkill against 4 insignificant people, was an attempt to change the conversation about him in Michigan among the Arab American voters. That's right, Michigan is the center of Arab America. Biden is doing nothing but playing to his party's base, seeking to convince them that he shares their contempt for Israeli lives that is a key element in the call for ceasefire before Hamas is eliminated. The president's prioritizing the winning of Michigan and the seduction of his party's many Israel haters can't be dignified by foolish talk of a doctrine that will supposedly solve the problems of the region with a Palestinian state that really nobody wants. But the real loser in his politicization of the Middle East policy is the security of a Jewish state that is being endangered by his vendetta against Netanyahu. And again, he puts America in harm's way. The Bible says, I will bless those about Israel who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. Let's go to economy for a little bit. And I haven't been there for a couple weeks. Let me tell you a little bit. This is a blueprint, this article says, for how the dollar goes kaput. Failing to fix the spending problem spells disaster for the United States and for the U.S. dollar. The U.S. government will add $20 trillion to the national debt through 2033. Now, again, most of these numbers and the mechanisms of the Fed and everything else really escape most Americans. I want to break it down best I can for you today. 20 trillion is an absurd amount of new debt. It's absurd. The Fed's unelected Federal Open Market Committee, it's called the FOMC, holds public, periodic, closed-door meetings to make decisions about the U.S. money supply. You've heard that. The Fed are meeting, whether they're going to raise interest rates or lower it. It's behind closed doors. They do it themselves. When they expand the money supply, they give it a very technical sounding name. You remember, like quantitative easing. But ultimately, what this means is that they conjure trillions of dollars out of thin air with a click of a button. Now, please listen to this, because this is your economy. It's actually quite bizarre when you think about it. They make a few entries into an electronic ledger, and poof, new money exists. It's essentially the electronic version of having a printing press, which is why we often say that the Fed prints money. The Fed then lends that money to the federal government, and the mechanism for this is buying U.S. Treasury bonds. Because the Fed has this special ability to print money, something which no one else is legally allowed to do, there is realistically no limit to how many bonds they can buy. If the government needs to borrow $20 trillion, the Fed has the capacity to print and lend $20 trillion. And this is the key issue. When individuals, corporations, or even foreign governments buy U.S. Treasury bonds, they are buying those bonds with existing money that's already in the system. The Fed creates about $4 trillion of new money to buy the biggest chunk of that debt. And the end result of that so much sudden new money is a 9% inflation. So if 4 trillion in new money caused 9% inflation historically, how much inflation will 20 trillion create? Most of this amount, 15 trillion, will accumulate over the next 5 to 7 years. So this is really the time frame for increased inflation risk and serious threats to the US dollar. Because with an explosion in US government debt and renewed inflation, there is a very strong chance that the foreigners will finally demand a change. The United States and the US dollar have been in command of the global financial system ever since the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed at the end of World War II. We are the reserve currency of the entire world. This agreement made the United States dollar the world's dominant reserve currency, forcing every single nation, every major bank, every large corporation to hold US dollars for international trade and financial transactions. The dollar's reserve status is a very special privilege for the United States. It's made us prosperous. But if the world finally demands a new, de-dollarized system, then foreigners will no longer need to hold US dollar assets, including US government bonds. And the Fed would need to print even more money to make up for the loss of foreign investors, causing even more inflation. There are still a handful of ways that the United States can navigate out of this mess, but options are narrowing, and the window to act is closing. And if no action is taken, the scenario is likely to play out over the next 5 to 7 years, if not sooner. So we're in a tight spot. We've created more and more money, falsely, bought bonds that mean nothing, and now we're seemingly holding the bag. Let's go a little bit and talk about the war. Why did Biden give Iran proxies time to prepare for the strikes? Iran and its terror and militia groups, proxy groups, had days to prepare and bunker down for the U.S. retaliatory strikes that began on last Friday, prompting citizens criticism that the Biden administration took too long to act. 2 Fridays ago, 3 U.S. soldiers were killed and dozens more were injured in an airstrike launched by Islamic resistance in Iraq. Nearly a week later, the Biden administration began its first round of retaliatory strikes, which some critics feel were delayed to give Iran and its proxies time to prepare as part of a larger effort to minimize heightened conflicts in the Middle East. Biden desperately does not want to go into Iran. He does not want to, quote, escalate the war. In the meantime, what he's doing is giving Iran a bad signal. He's letting them know that we're weak. They're continuing to strike. Their proxies are continuing to strike. He's doing absolutely nothing. He's letting them push him and push him and push him. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Simone Leiden, told the Daily Caller News Foundation that she believes the delayed response was intentional because the Biden administration doesn't want to strike Iran and its allies too harshly. It's almost like we want to minimize Iranian casualties by giving them as much notice as humanly possible. How many IRGC and IRGC QF commanders will the U.S. kill, and how senior are they? Or did they all get out of Dodge after the days of the Biden administration telegraphing these strikes? Actually, reports tell us they did. They were told to leave areas. The Biden administration retaliatory strikes came too late, were publicized too heavily in advance, undermining the efforts to stop Iran and its proxies from continued aggression in the Middle East. Critics of the Biden administration have also questioned why the U.S. has not targeted Iran directly. The administration's intentional leaks about what we would attack Iran allowed Iranian leaders to flee, one of the Pentagon officials said. Several Iran-backed military groups had already evacuated many of their headquarters inside Iraq and on the border with Syria and moved their weapons to new locations to avoid the strikes, one U.S. official told NBC News on Friday. Islamic resistance in Iraq, who the Pentagon suspects was behind the drone strike on Sunday, has ceased military operations way ahead of the U.S. response. So what he's doing is showing more and more weakness. He's not doing anything to take anyone out. Now, let me go a little bit further and give you a little bit about religion, because we're watching these things happen on a lot of different fronts. These are the things that Jesus told us to watch for in Matthew 24. This article says, can American churches reap a harvest among the Generation Z religious nuns? N-O-N-E-S. Young Americans are more likely to disassociate from organized religion, according to a recent Pew Research study on religious nuns. Despite their professional professed disassociation, the nuns, these individuals, are not necessarily hardened against the message of the gospel. These nuns, it looks like a big number, but only 70% identify as atheists, 20% as agnostic, and 63% nothing in particular. They're not connected to any church or affiliation. These numbers don't show a rejection of God, Pew Research says, but rather a rejection of organized religion. So, think the nuns, why bother? It's a generation who doesn't necessarily want to reject spirituality or God or religion or Christianity. They're just saying, we want more information. Give us truth. We want to find the right place to land, but they haven't found that yet. There should be a wake-up call for churches. If a young 20-something with no firm religious beliefs walked through the front doors on a Sunday morning, what would he find? Would he find a joyful people deeply committed to the truths they believe, or hurried people preoccupied with sports, politics, or their phones? These nuns are looking for truth. They're looking for people to actually live out Christianity. Would they hear them lifting their voices in worship to God, or would worship be outsourced to stage performers? Would they see the Word of God opened and its doctrines explained, or would they leave no wiser than they came? Would they note the gospel of Jesus Christ infused throughout the service, or would his experience confirm his prejudice that Christianity simply aimed to make people better like every other religion? Would they encounter the literal words of God handed down for thousands of years, or would they encounter contemporary notions sold with contemporary techniques? Would they have time to reflect on what they heard, or would the hour-long service be overly hurried to usher in the next crowd? Would they be convicted, called to account, and compelled to recognize that God is really among you? Or would the hour of good feelings merely strike him as a cross between a concert and a TED Talk? That's the nuns want real truth. They want the gospel. And the church really needs to wake up and give it to them in America. Can American churches reap a harvest among Generation Z and the nuns? That's that article. And I think it's really important for us to ask ourselves if that's the case. Let's go a little bit further in religion and give you this one. The media is silent as persecution of Christians worsens around the globe. Open Doors International, a nonprofit organization that supports persecuted Christians in over 70 countries, has released its annual 2024 World Watch List, which highlights and ranks countries in which Christians face the most severe persecution and discrimination. Tragically, the 2024 report reveals that persecution against Christianity is worsening all over the globe. 365 million Christians faced severe persecution and discrimination for their faith last year. More than 14,700 churches or Christian properties such as schools and hospitals were targeted in 2023. It marked a sevenfold increase compared with attacks recorded the previous year. North Korea is the most dangerous place in the world for Christians. You don't even want to say that you're a Christian in North Korea. You'll be immediately imprisoned. Leader Kim Jong-un sees Christianity as a threat to the dictatorship and carries out an effective death sentence to believers. If they find you're a Christian, they kill you. In China, General Secretary Xi Jinping similarly sees Christianity as a threat to the Chinese Communist Party's power. Last year, at least 10,000 churches were closed in China. In Asia as a whole, 2 in 5 Christians are persecuted for their faith. India faced violent attacks from Hindu extremists in India. In Africa, 1 in 5 Christians are persecuted. Somalia was ranked number 2 for countries in which Christians face the most extreme persecution. Nigeria, according to Open Door, remains the deadliest place to follow Jesus, other than North Korea. In 2023, nearly 5,000 Christians were killed for their faith, with 82% of the slayings occurring in Nigeria. Ranked number 6 on the 2024 World Watch List, according to Open Doors, more Christians are killed for their faith in Nigeria than in all other countries of the world combined. Matthew 24 is what Jesus said. He tells us one of the signs of the age, the end of the age will be this: you will be hated for my name's sake, and it's happening. Let's talk about wokeism. YMCA camp goes full throttle woke with all gender cabins. I don't even believe I could read this to you, but this is what's happening. A YMCA camp's full throttle acceleration into wokeness has prompted a warning from a local publications to parents. Heads Up Parents suggests the Connecticut Sentinel regarding the Camp Hazen facility in Chester, Connecticut, after its announcement that it's adding all gender cabins. Or for those who simply decide they don't want to be in a traditional gendered cabin for any reason. But the warning continues, there's more. All the traditional boys and girls cabins are now Boys Plus and Girls Plus. To make sure that all campers are included and feel a sense of belonging, the report said those who will be allowed in the Boys Plus facilities include boys, transgender, and non-binary campers who want to be there and more. Same for the Girls Plus cabins. So that means if you have a younger camper, say a daughter entering 3rd grade in the fall, and this is her very first sleepaway camp experience, she could end up in a cabin with a biological boy who decides to identify as a girl. The YMCA, by the way, believes it is morally right, the morally right thing to do to allow children to identify whatever gender they like and stay in whichever cabin they want. The YMCA Hazen camp director, Catherine Davies, even said she felt it was more transparent this way. Quote, "We're not doing anything different from anyone else in the world. We just want to be inclusive." There's that word again. Yet another Once Treasure program has been infected by radical, progressive gender ideology. Now, I pulled this from their website, the YMCA's website, in Birmingham and in the rest of the country. Here's what it says. This is their mission statement: to put Christian principles into practice through programs that build healthy spirit, mind, and body for all. Transgenderism is not a Christian principle, so I don't know how they get away with that. It used to stand for Young Men's Christian Association. I guess they think it still does. I like to make it the YMCA, those call letters, like to make it stand for this: your messed up cultural assignment. It has nothing to do with Christianity. And let me give you this last one because it's pretty interesting. And you're going to hear me saying more and more about this. 2024 X solar eclipse. Coincidence, or is it a final warning? Now, you may only hear it here, but I really believe it's a warning from God. The Bible says that the stars are for signs, seasons, and times. If you listen to last week's study, you've heard that about in Genesis. So what's likely to become the biggest travel event in 2024 in America? Is it the Super Bowl or maybe the Indianapolis 500? Nope. According to the Washington Post, it will be the solar eclipse that will cross the United States on April 8th, 2024. This eclipse sparked added interest among prophecy watchers because of its relationship to another darkening of the sun that occurred on August 21st, 2017. And some of you have seen it, but the documentary I did in Hollywood called The Sign talks about these two eclipses. The two eclipses, 7 years apart, will form an X across America, intersecting, right here, this, at Little Egypt, a small town in southern Illinois. Is this just a coincidence, or is it the Lord's way of alerting America that judgment is on the way? The pattern of two solar eclipses forming an X over the United States happened once before, in the early 1800s. Remarkably, the intersection of this century's solar eclipses will be about 100 miles from when those of the 19th century crossed paths. So, the first solar eclipse occurred in June 16, 1806, with the second completing the X on September 17, 1811. Now, I just want you to continue to listen to what this is saying because it's pretty amazing. The intersection happened over the New Madrid fault line, which included an area from Cairo, again you have that Egypt connection, in southern Illinois, to nearly New Madrid, Missouri. On December 16th of 1811, just 3 months after the second solar eclipse, a series of devastating earthquakes struck along the New Madrid fault line. And here's a quote from the New Madrid website of that time. The New Madrid earthquakes are the biggest earthquakes in American history. They occurred in the central Mississippi Valley, but were felt as far away as New York City, Boston, Montreal, and Washington, D.C. President James Madison and his wife Dolly felt them in the White House. Church bells rang in Boston. I've quoted that to you before. From December 16, 1811 through March 1812, there were over 2,000 earthquakes in central Midwest and between 6,000 to 10,000 earthquakes in the Boot Heel of Missouri, where New Madrid is located near the junction of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. Actually, it diverted the Ohio River and the Mississippi. In the known history of the world, no other earthquakes have lasted so long or produced so much evidence of damage as the New Madrid earthquakes. 3 of the earthquakes are on the list of America's top earthquakes ever. Could the upcoming completion of an X across the U.S. midsection by April 8th to 2024 eclipse point to another catastrophe in the months afterward? Is it pointing to that? Is this just an uncanny coincidence, or is it something more ominous? I believe this year's solar eclipse, which will complete an X of the United States, signifies the nearness of God's judgment, even if it's not his last warning. Why? Well, first, we are living in a time of unbelievable moral decay, from current politicians to gender-bending liberals, and let's not forget dispute over the Roe versus Wade, and even though, despite Roe versus Wade being overturned, babies are still being slaughtered in America. 62 million babies have been murdered in the womb since 1973. Both sex trafficking and pedophilia continue unabated in the U.S. under Biden, who unashamedly promotes LGBTQ plus doctrine not only in America but around the world. The U.S. president is putting extreme pressure now on Israel to give up its pursuit of the Hamas terrorists and to agree to a 2-state solution, which he says is the only path to peace. The Bible tells us that the Lord will deal harshly with any nation that pursues such a policy of dividing his land. Second, we live in the shadow of the 7-year tribulation, when the entire earth will experience the fury of God's wrath. The myriad of signs telling us that this time is ever so near. It's certain that the Lord will bring much destruction to America during this time if we don't change. But does the upcoming solar eclipse signify the nearness of this time? Is it God's final warning to America? Is he reminding us that the stars are for signs, not just seasons and times? We know that his wrath will fall on the United States if they continue the way they are. We just don't know when. It could be this week, it could be next month, this year, or later. We do know that at any moment, Jesus will come for his own, and soon afterwards, sudden destruction will fall upon the unsuspecting world. That's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. If you've not yet put your trust in Jesus, please do. Some of you only listen to in the news. I wish you would listen to the rest of it. It will really build your faith. But maybe you just got involved in the news. Well, Jesus is the only path to eternal life. I don't want to end this news without giving you an invitation. Please don't delay. Call upon Jesus while you can. Tomorrow may be too late to avoid the truth and to avoid the death and destruction that will sweep over the entire world. The April 8, 2024 solar eclipse may not be the Lord's final warning for an unsuspecting nation and the world, but then again, it might be. That's in the news for tonight. We're going to go